When my daughter was 2 months old, my mom and I decided to go with them to church. The first thing that the pastor said to me when we got there is that God still loved me. Okay, you have one foot in the world and one foot in the church. What one are you going to choose? So with all of that, I just broke down and I said, okay, God, I'm giving you my life. And we had missionaries come in. She was a single lady. Her testimony just blew me away, that she was out there living in the jungle. And I thought, Lord, I will do that. I will go anywhere. I wanted to know what was next. And the Lord kept saying, I need you to wait. But I was like, okay, but she's in college. She's starting to live her life. I said, your ministry to your daughter is not done yet. God's not going to tell you that next step until your ministry is done. And the Lord said, you know, that passion or that calling that I put on your heart years ago to go out into the mission field. He said, yeah, now's the time. I'm Kelly Corona. I guess I'll start at the beginning. I was not raised in a Christian home, though I did have two parents that loved me and my sister. So it's me and an older sister. We were not Christian. Mom and dad had a lot of trauma from their past, so they were there, but I could tell, especially as an adult, they were there's anger and there's a lot of trauma that they had to deal with. So then my sister and me kind of just formed a bond-ish. I kind of idolized my sister. Growing up, it was just the four of us a lot because their families really didn't talk to them a lot. But was not raised in a Christian home, so we kind of left to the world's devices. My sister got into drugs, and of course, me idolizing her, I did try it. First time I think I tried drugs was 13. Was not my cup of tea. Tried the drinking thing, wasn't there. I did smoke, started smoking around the same time, and that was on and off again. Childhood was just kind of one of those worldly childhoods. I think when I hit 5th grade, we moved to Colorado, because that's when my parents said, okay, enough's enough. We got to get out of California. And then my sister was very much into the drug scene with her best friend. So they were like, we got to get out. Came to Colorado, stuff started to somewhat improve, but my sister fell into the same thing. So I was kind of left to my own, which was fine. I was in my own little world. I enjoyed it. Nothing major in my childhood, except it was, the typical worldly family. At 16, I graduated high school, so I graduated a year early, and I decided to take a semester off and was just working. Got into a relationship with not the best sort of guy that you could imagine. And though it wasn't physically abusive, it was more emotional and mental. He was very controlling. And I think that's when the anorexia started to kick in, because it was part of something I could control. I could tell myself when to eat, when not to eat. I was 5'10" and 110 pounds at best. Finally broke up with him, 6-7 months after the fact of realizing what was going on. Kind of floated through life, and then started dating a friend of mine who was just as bad, if not worse. I mean, more controlling, more possessive, manipulative. And by the time I hit 19, I was like, well, I have to marry him because I'd already had sex with him. It was just, that's what you did. And then I found myself pregnant at 19. That was a wake-up call, because I never wanted kids. That was not in the plan. Marry my career, fine, but not kids. My family was kind of falling apart at that time. My sister was off doing her thing. My parents' marriage was struggling, at best. So my dad and my sister went to a church that they heard over the radio in Colorado. They heard the pastor over it. Walked into the church, and my mom and I were like, we're not going. Took us about 2 months after I had my daughter. So I think they went right before I had my daughter or right after. And my daughter was 2 months old. My mom and I decided to go with them to church. And I thought, well, it's okay, we'll go. Of course, I have a 2-month-old that I have no idea how I'm taking care of. And the first thing that the pastor said to me when we got there is that God still loved me. As I'm holding this baby, that was the first thing. And that was that first spark that tried to, or that God used, not tried to, but God used to crack my heart, because it was very hard. I didn't give my life to the Lord right then. I decided it was really good for my daughter. She needed the church. It was a good thing to raise her in the church, but I was doing fine. Ended up getting into another relationship with another guy. Not a good one at all. I said, oh, I can't sleep with you because now I'm a Christian, but he wasn't accepting of that. And there was numerous times that he was like, one of these times I'm not going to listen to your no. Took about a month or two and I gave in again. And we continued for about a month, and then he finally looked at me one day when we got into a fight and he said, it's me or God. And that was kind of that last straw that God used to just break me, of saying, okay, you have one foot in the world and one foot in the church. What one are you going to choose? I'd also have to say that at that time, I was not the mom that I should have been. I neglected her a lot of working or trying to figure out life. Thank God for my parents, because they really stepped up. So at the same time that happened, my parents were like, okay, you either give her to us or become a real mom. And so with all of that, I just broke down and I said, okay, God, I'm giving you my life. I'm not going to date anyone. I'm going to focus on you and my child. That's it. Until you bring someone in my life, that's it. Probably that first year was the hardest, of trying to figure out at 21. I'm not a 20-year-old because I have a daughter, but I'm still in my 20s, so trying to balance the two. It was very hard. There was a lot of hardness that he had to break down, a lot of past trauma that had to be dealt with, and trying to figure out how to be responsible for another little human. So it was at that time that we had a missionary come in. Rachel was about 2 or 3, and we had missionaries come in because our church supported them. And she was a single lady living in the Amazon, and her testimony just blew me away, that she was out there living in the jungle. And I thought, Lord, I will do that. I will go anywhere. You know, I had my heart set on serving the Lord with my child, and I was like, I can do that. I was like, I'll go anywhere. And that was my heart's prayer. He had some stuff he had to work on. I was still smoking at that time. And I went, I think it was a New Year's. I went with some friends in the mountains. My mom and dad watched Rachel, and I was still smoking, and they were Christian, which was awesome to be surrounded by that. And I don't know what it was, but we talked about my cigarettes, and they were like, you should just give it up, blah, blah, blah. But they weren't harping on me. It was more just talking. And I said, well, I should, but I enjoy it too much. So, that night I was like, Lord, I enjoy smoking too much. If you want me to stop, you're going to have to take it from me, because I'm not willing to give it up. I'm telling you, I know it sounds funny, but the next day I woke up and went out to have my morning cigarette, and I just didn't want it. And that was the last time I had ever smoked. And it blew me away, because I was like, he totally just took that desire away. So it's been, my daughter's 22 now, so it's been, almost 20 years and still nothing. So it's awesome. But there was stuff that he needed to work on in my heart. It was still pretty hard, pretty arrogant. Just, he used those forming years to just break it down. And so as I looked at our missionary map, I thought, okay, Lord, where would I go? Like, I'll go anywhere. I would not be too keen on where it snows, because I'm not a cold person, but I told him I would go. And on the map, there was East Asia. And I thought, they had pins everywhere, but in East Asia, they didn't have any pins. And I was like, why? So I started researching and started reading biographies, and the Lord started to prick my heart for East Asia, especially for the Chinese-speaking nations, and just how lost and I think almost forgotten and maybe that's not a word, but I see a lot of people going to Africa and South America and Europe, but I didn't hear a lot about people going to East Asia. So started praying about it. I mean, my daughter was even on board with it, you know. We would talk about it, and I said, well, what if we moved to China? And she goes, that would be awesome. Then you can open up an orphanage and adopt 99 more girls. So then I had siblings, and I was like, oh, maybe not. But in her little 5-6-year-old mind, that was what you do. So she had even said when she grows up, she wanted to be a Chinese. And I was like, yep, still not how that works, babe. But I mean, now her and I can laugh about it, but it was cute. But it wasn't God's timing. He was saying no, and that was something I struggled with a lot. Looking back on it now, it was a good thing because about the time my daughter hit 12, our relationship hit a snag, and she was going through a lot. I didn't know how to handle it. I was going through a lot, and we just butted heads so much. I mean, there was at least one time vividly I can remember being on the phone with my mom going, you're going to have to take her. I can't do this. One or both of us is going to die. Like, I can't parent her. Luckily, my parents didn't take her and then just walked us through it. We came out stronger, but then at 13, 14, she was diagnosed with epilepsy. She had struggled health-wise in her first 5-6 years. That got better. But then she developed epilepsy, and that threw both of us for a loop. I mean, it was very scary, and just crying out to the Lord of what now? Because now it was like, I can't move her anywhere. I don't want to take her, you know, out of the state without my parents there and my sister. And but slowly but surely, the Lord just worked for me on trusting him. He's like, how much do I love her? And that was the first little bit of him teaching me to pass her over to him and not take her back. This is my child. There was times in church where I had good friends, mentor moms, as I call them, that would sit with me and just go over scripture about trusting him, trusting my child to him. I think it was this time that Rachel went from being my little girl to my idol. And that took a couple of years before the Lord really pointed out, and I think my mom helped in that, where she said, your child has become your idol. She's more important than the Lord. And I thought, oh, well, that's not good. I homeschooled her for a few years up till 5th grade, even while working full time. I was blessed with a job that allowed me to bring her in. So about the time she got epilepsy, she was in a private school, and all of that just hit with the epilepsy and the private school, and then realizing that her and her education had become my idol. That was first in my life. And I had to take a step back and say, you're not my idol. I have to give you over to the Lord. And that was hard because all of her health issues, I mean, watching your baby just sit there and have a seizure in front of you was the scariest thing, because no one else was around. Like, it was just me and her, and my whole world just collapsed at that point. So I remember trying numerous things. She didn't like the medicine that they had her on. It made her feel groggy. So, and we didn't like I think more both of us, but she didn't like the doctor. He creeped her out, and he wasn't the best. But I started looking at natural stuff, but then the Lord just brought back and said, why haven't you come to me in prayer? And I thought, no, I've prayed. And he's like, you haven't prayed. You haven't brought her to be prayed over. And I thought, well, I have medicine. We're doing this, and we're changing her diet. And he's like, you're still putting her above me. And I thought, okay, and this was about a year into her epilepsy journey. And so I finally, she's not one for attention. So it was more of having a conversation with her of like, I want you to get prayed over, anointed with oil. And she's looking at me like, you want me the center of attention up on a stage. or by the stage. And I was like, we'll do it after church. Not everybody will be there. So we did. We went and we had, numerous of the pastors had already known because they were in the hospital with us when she had the huge seizure. But we just had her prayed over and anointed. My family was there, a couple of our close friends, and a couple of the pastors. I don't know that she healed right away. It wasn't some miraculous healing right away, but I know that for me, it was giving her over to the Lord, of saying, you're not my idol anymore, you're his. I need to entrust him to you, or you to him. And so she started getting better, and she didn't have any more seizures. And about a few months later, I want to say, we went to a new neurologist. And she was like, well, she's been seizure free for almost 2 years. So with medicine, so let's take her off the medicine, which hindsight being what it was, my daughter had said she already had been taking herself off the medicine. I did not realize that as mom. She really didn't like how it was. We talked about that a couple of years after the fact. She was like, oh, I had been taking it for a few months, Mom. I'm like, that's not something you want to tell me. But we took her off the medicine, and she was doing good. She was able to get her driver's license, and she wasn't having seizures. She wasn't having the absent seizures. And it was like we could breathe again. So we continued on, and how her schooling worked, she was able to do college and high school at the same time. It was an amazing program that they had started in Colorado. And so she graduated a month before she turned 17 from high school with her associates. So at that point it was, okay, where are you looking at going to university? Because she wanted her 4-year degree. So we started looking, and at first she thought, I'm going to go to CSU because she loves horses. She likes ag. They had a degree she was interested in. We went up there. It was almost a sealed deal of she was going to go to CSU. And then she comes to me and she's like, I think I'm going to switch majors. And I'm like, okay, this is like, I don't know how, like, I don't know, it was a few months before she graduated. And I'm like, now we're switching majors? Okay. And so the program that she wanted, or the type of program, wasn't in Colorado. None of the schools we could find had programs. So I started researching. Now, there was only one school she did not want to go to. In all of the world, there was only one school she didn't want to go to. I say that dramatically, but this was a specific school. She said, okay, well, I'll go almost anywhere but here. And I just Googled a program, and I pulled up the program because she was doing, it's like linguistics. She switched from global studies to like a linguistics program because she loves languages. And I said, cool. So I pulled up this program, and it was like everything that she wanted. So I screenshot it and I gave it to her, and I said, she's like, Mom, this is the program. What school is this? Yeah. The school that you didn't want to go to, that's where it's at. And she just looked at me like, seriously? And I said, pray about it. Let's see what God says. So she looked at the program more, and we decided to pray about it separately, and then we'll come together a few weeks later. And it was within days that the Lord just gave me this, I don't want to say speak or feeling, but I knew we were moving to Tennessee. And I was like, oh, I'm not telling her. The Lord has to tell her because she doesn't want to go to Tennessee. She wanted somewhere cold, or I told her, please, somewhere warm and a beach. Like, it had to be combined. It didn't, but I was like, if I'm moving with you, because at 17, she wasn't going to any school out of state without me. I just wasn't comfortable with it. She was like, I want it cold, or I'll give Mom her ocean because I love the ocean. So I think it was 2 or 3 weeks later, and she came to me kind of resigned one night, and she's like, so Mom, and I was like, yeah, I'm getting ready for bed. But that's when she always would talk to me is right before bed. I'm like, can we do this? I don't know when I'm awake, but she came to me and she goes, so I think we're moving to Tennessee. And I was like, so that's the program you want? That's the school you want? And she goes, yeah. She goes, I really feel like the Lord is saying to go. And I told her, I said, honey, he had already told me we were moving. I'd been making small steps to transition us to Tennessee. I had talked to my folks. We had friends out here. I had talked to them about, being with them for a little while until we got our footing. And she's like, well, why didn't you tell me? I was like, that was up to God to tell you, not me. I mean, you wouldn't hear from me anyway. So you needed to know that's where God wanted you. Luckily, my sister and my mom kind of helped because they just surprised us with a visit halfway through the summer. And they're like, okay, we're going to go out and we'll just cheer you up. And eventually I found a job with people that I absolutely enjoy. It was a godsend. I mean, not something that I want to do long term, but I love the people. So, and then, COVID hit, which was my daughter's dream because she had to stay home and she is a homebody. That drove me nuts. But during this time, it was a lot of time of struggling because I wanted to know what was next. And the Lord kept saying, I need you to wait. But I was like, okay, but she's in college. She's starting to live her life. She's coming into her own. Like, what do you have for me? And I had talked to my mom and then a friend back in Colorado. And now, granted, these two don't talk to each other. Not that they don't like each other. They just don't talk to each other. They go to separate churches. And both of them said the same thing. They said, your ministry to your daughter is not done yet. God's not going to tell you that next step until your ministry is done. And Rachel went through a really hard time. She is not as free-spirited as me, I guess you would say. She likes her family a lot. She likes her house. She's much homebody. So for her to get uprooted out to Tennessee, and then for COVID to hit, and now she's in lockdown, and then it started opening again. It was just a lot of change for her, and she doesn't do the change well. So I realized that I had to help her through that. Thank God for our church family because she found a safe haven for that. That was a good thing because I think she would have gone completely nuts and just gone back home. But as she was getting ready to graduate, she was 19. She was getting ready to graduate at 19. I started praying and I said, Lord, what is it you have? And he, kind of showed me through the last few years of what he was preparing. He brought me to Tennessee, not for Rachel, but for me, because I had gotten to a place that I was seeking more head knowledge and I had forgotten my first love. As they say, Revelation said, you forgot your first love. And he's like, I need you back there. And I was like, well, I haven't done that. I'm good. We're good. The self-denial is really great. But that's okay. So as she was getting ready to graduate, I was working through a lot of that with the Lord of, okay, now what? Because I've poured everything into my daughter, but now she's graduating, and then she got an offer to go teach back in Colorado. And she was like, I think I'm going to take it. I think that's what the Lord has, which it was. It was an awesome opportunity. She never thought about teaching, but this is something that came up. And the Lord said, that passion or that calling that I put on your heart years ago to go out into the mission field. He said, yeah, now's the time. And I was like, really, Lord? I think maybe the time's passed. Rachel's grown up. I should be settling, somewhere. And it was just this thing. And I, talked to Rachel about it because obviously if I go, she's not. And she looks at me and she goes, Mom, you've wanted this for years. You need to go. And for me, that was, no matter the friends or the family or anything, it was knowing that my daughter was behind me and she would be okay if I went. It was huge. And I said, okay. So I started looking of course, in East Asia, because that's where my heart has always flowed, I guess, or been, I was like, how can I make this work? Because I didn't know any organization that was in East Asia. So I was like, how can I go over there on my own? And I was looking at teaching English as a second language. So the Lord opened up a door for me to finish my education, because I stopped at a 2-year degree when I had Rachel. And he just opened doors after door after door for me to finish my education in a field that I wanted, that would help me on the mission field. I got certified in teaching English, and it was one open door. And I said, Lord, I'm going to continue down this road until you close a door. And I walked through the door with my education, getting teaching certified. I even did ESL from a Christian perspective. And then I was praying about it, and I was like, Lord, I'd really like to go with an organization, So I researched, and I found 2 different ones that were in East Asia. And as I started talking and listening and reading about both, one just stood out. And I was like, I got to go with them. I really feel drawn to them. So I started the process again, telling them, I'm going to go until the Lord closes the door. He hasn't closed the door yet. So it's been awesome to see him work and see how he's worked, of not only bringing me back to my first love, back to the basics of my relationship with the Lord, but also, even though I have some of the trauma and stuff from the past, of using it in a way. So this last October was kind of my final step on my final first step, I guess you would say. Like, it was prep work up to it, finishing my degree, going through the stuff with the organization that I'm going with. And this last October, they said, yes, we want you in the mission field. And they asked me over the last, year and a half that I've been working with them, of where. And I said, well, first and foremost, it would probably be Taiwan or China, because my heart is for the Chinese speaking nations. It was really, where would you want to go, and do we have a placement for you within that country? And so I met with the people in Taiwan, and it kind of just clicked. And as I read more and talked to them more, I was like, that's where the Lord wants me. He wants me in Taiwan. Now, I've never been, but I had never been to Tennessee before I moved here. So I'm like, it's fine to go sight unseen. When my mom was a little nervous, and a couple of other friends, they're like, maybe you should go. And I was like, but God's not going to tell me no now. I mean, he's been opening door after door. So now I'm at the point that I'm at that final push before I go into the mission field. And it's just surreal that it took 20 years, but God's timing is never ours. Lean into the Lord. Just focus on the next step. What is it that he's calling you to do right now? The calling may be there, but right now he has something for you in front of you, be it your children or a job, or he knows what's coming, but just take that next step here and lean into him. Because I think a lot of times we can get frustrated that it's not happening on our timetable, so we kind of pull away from the Lord, but we need to do the opposite and lean into him. For me, a lot of it was realizing that my relationship with the Lord has to come before my relationship with my daughter. So there were times that I needed to focus on God and sit and hear from him, where Rachel was like, why are you not with me? Well, I'm with you all the time. And I think it's a little bit easier as a single mom to idolize or put your kids on that idol pedestal, because that's you're all encompassing almost. But I think a lot of times it's realizing that they're not first. He's first. That doesn't mean to neglect your kids for the things of the Lord either. I mean, there's that balance that you have to play. But for me, it was turning her to the Lord especially when all her health and stuff, that I didn't want to go to church. I wanted to just sit and watch her and make sure she was okay. She was not okay with that. She's like, you've got to go away. But it was, and then her education of, you got to study, you got to do this. And I finally, at one point, had to say, you know what, even if you fail all your classes, if you're walking with the Lord, that's my priority. Of just setting those priorities instead of, you have to get the good grades and you have to do this. It's, are you walking with the Lord? Then everything else doesn't matter. So we just hit it September, Labor Day was, I always get it wrong, 6 years seizure free, 4 without meds. So it's kind of, Labor Day's always our celebration weekend where we're like, look, you made it another year. And she's like, I know, Mom. I mean, more celebration for me, because for her, she doesn't remember much except waking up, with the ambulance there. But yeah, she is doing really good. She's up in Michigan. She's still teaching. So that was, so when we moved to Tennessee, the semester after she started school, she went back to her original major. And I was like, really? We moved all the way out here and we could have stayed in Colorado. But hindsight being what it was, he wanted us out here. So, but yeah, she's teaching and progressively finding her way in her 20s to her own life. So